Elementary and Secondary Education will come to order. Welcome everyone. I note that a quorum is present. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on charting the path to educational equity post-COVID-19. And this is an entirely remote hearing. All microphones will be kept muted as a general rule to avoid unnecessary background noise. Members and witnesses will be responsible for unmuting themselves when they are recognized to speak or when they wish to seek recognition. I also ask that members please identify themselves before they speak. Members should keep their cameras on while in the proceeding. Members shall be considered present in the proceeding when they are visible on camera, and they shall be considered not present when they are not visible on camera. The only exception to this is if they are experiencing technical difficulty and inform committee staff of such difficulty. If any member experiences technical difficulties during the hearing, you should stay connected on the platform, make sure you're muted, and use your phone to immediately call the committee's IT director, whose number was provided in advance. Should the chair experience technical difficulty or need to step away, Chairman Scott, as a member of the subcommittee, or another majority member of the subcommittee, if the Chairman Scott is not available, is hereby authorized to assume the gavel in the chair's absence. This is an entirely remote hearing, and as such, the committee's hearing room is officially closed. Members who choose to sit with their individual devices in the hearing room must wear headphones to avoid feedback, echoes, and distortion resulting from more than one person on the software platform sitting in the same room. Members are also expected to adhere to social distancing and safe healthcare guidance, including the use of masks, hand sanitizers, and wiping down their areas both before and after their presence in the hearing room. In order to ensure that the committee's 5-minute rule is adhered to, staff will be keeping track of time using the committee's field timer. The field timer will appear on its own thumbnail picture and will be named 001_timer. There will be no 1-minute remaining warning. The field timer will sound its audio alarm when time is up, and it goes really loud. Boop. Members and witnesses are asked to wrap up promptly when their time has expired. While a roll call is not necessary to establish a quorum in official proceedings conducted remotely or with remote participation, the committee has made it a practice whenever there is an official proceeding with remote participation for the clerk to call the roll to help make clear who is present at the start of the proceeding. Members should say their name before announcing they are present. This helps the clerk and also helps those watching the platform and the live stream who may experience a few seconds delay. So at this time, I ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Sablan.
Sablan is present.
Mrs. Hayes.
Hayes is present.
Mr. Grijalva.
Present.
Mr. Yarmouth.
Present.
Ms. Wilson.
Ms. Wilson is present.
Mr. DeSagne. Mr. Morelli.
Mr. Morelli is present.
Mrs. McBath.
Mrs. McBath is present.
Mr. Levin.
Levin is present.
Ms. Manning.
Fantastic.
Manning is present.
Mr. Bowman. Mr. Scott.
Scott is present.
Ranking Member Owens.
Owens is present.
Mr. Grossman. Mr. Allen. Mr. Keller.
Keller is present.
Mrs. Miller.
Miller is present.
Mr. Cawthorn. Mrs. Steele,
Still present.
Mrs. Fox.
Fox is present.
Chairman Scott, Chairman Sablon, this concludes the roll call.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And pursuant to Rule 8C, opening statements are limited to the chair and the ranking member. And this allows us to hear from our witnesses sooner and provides all members with adequate time to ask questions. I recognize myself now for the purpose of making an opening statement. Today, we meet to examine the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on school communities and discuss strategies for safely reopening classrooms and addressing educational disparities. It has been just over a year since the pandemic forced schools to abruptly switch to online platforms, disrupting the education of more than 55 million students and upending our communities. Unfortunately, the consequences of this transition have extended beyond lost in-person instructions. School closures have restricted students' access to nutritious school meals and social and emotional learning opportunities. And schools are less likely to identify cases of child abuse and neglect while classrooms are closed. In my district, COVID-19 has had the greatest impact on students with disabilities, Title I qualified students, English learners, and other vulnerable students that already face significant challenges. Going into the pandemic, schools are predominantly serving students of color faced a $23 billion funding gap compared to schools predominantly serving white students. And because of this disparity, many students entered the pandemic without access to high-speed internet, dedicated devices, and other tools that are critical to remote learning. They will also return to older classrooms and campuses with much needed repairs from typhoons, some even to find school libraries losing their entire book collection, books meant for student literacy, dilapidated school facilities, including dangerously outdated ventilation systems, if they are there at all. The perfect storm of disparities has worsened inequities in unfinished learning and caused a measurable widening of achievement gaps. Research indicates Black and Latino students were 3 to 5 months behind in learning at the beginning of this school year. By the end of the school year, they could be 6 to 12 months behind compared to 4 to 8 months for white students. GAO reporting found that school districts struggled to provide education and services for students with disabilities and English learners. Further, a new survey by the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, found that more than half of all Black, Latino, and Asian fourth graders learned in a fully remote environment. Another survey showed that only about a quarter of Pacific Islanders receive full-time in-person instruction. In comparison, 25% of white students learn fully remotely, and nearly half of white students receive full-time in-person instructions. Students with disabilities have also disproportionately suffered from this pandemic in the wake of the Trump administration's failed COVID-19 response. Without adequate guidance from the department, schools struggled to maintain the special education services that students with disabilities needed to access quality education in a remote learning environment. Today, schools also face challenges to reopening classrooms for students with disabilities who may be more vulnerable to the virus. For example, the NAEP 2021 survey showed that 40% of schools prioritize students with disabilities for full-time in-person instructions in the 4th and 8th grades. Yet students with disabilities have not received in-person instructions at rates noticeably higher than other subgroup of students. This continued disparities make clear that to ensure that all schools and students recover from this pandemic, we must target relief and resources to underserved students who need them most. Over the past year, Congress has taken historic steps toward that goal through 3 major relief packages. the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplement to Appropriations Act, and the most recent, the American Rescue Plan Act. Combined together, these packages secured nearly $200 billion in urgent relief for schools. The funding has been critical for covering the increased cost of the pandemic and preparing for the $300 billion shortfall in state and local budgets. To date, a reduced state revenue has already cost more than 1 million education jobs. The American Rescue Plan specifically makes the most significant one-time investment in K-12 education in our nation's history. Under President Biden, Congress swiftly passed this legislation after school communities spent months calling for additional funding to reopen schools safely and support students. The nearly $130 billion of flexible funding in this package will help schools take the necessary steps to safely reopen and stay open. And it will help students overcome lost time in the classrooms as well as severe trauma, hunger, and homelessness. The American Rescue Plan funding will also help Congress fulfill its long-standing commitment to meeting the needs of students with disabilities. Specifically, the package dedicates $3 billion to ensure that K-12 students with disabilities can access the free and appropriate public education they have a right to, and toddlers with disabilities can access the services they need to be ready to enter the school system. The lessons from our pandemic response so far have provided a valuable foundation for Congress to take the next steps towards educational equity. For example, we need accurate data from statewide assessments to understand the full scope of this pandemic. Without this data, we cannot accurately target relief funding to support school communities where racial achievement gaps are greatest. We must also make a systemic reforms to our K-12 education system to fully address educational disparities. And this includes repairing crumbling school infrastructure, confronting the growing resegregation of public schools, and making other long-term investments to address educational disparities. Today, we will discuss the work we still have ahead to close persistent achievement gaps and ensure a recovery from this pandemic where every student succeeds. I want to thank our witnesses again for being with us, and I now yield to the ranking member, the full committee ranking member, Dr. Fox, for her opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, I will take that as ranking member. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for all our witnesses for joining us. Ensuring all children
could the gentleman suspend for a minute?
Yes.
Dr. Fox will make her opening statement.
Okay.
She's just trying to unmute herself. Okay. Dr. Fox, there should be the microphone should be on your lower right hand. If you're using a computer, you
Lower left hand, lower left hand.
Yeah, left hand corner facing it, Dr. Fox.
There we go.
Banyan, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes, yes.
I have no sound.
Okay, Dr. Fox, I apologize.
Sound has been cut off here.
Mr. Owens is actually going to make his opening statements, and then on the questioning, you're going to be ahead of Mr. Owens. So I apologize, my mistake. So could I go back and recognize Mr. Owens, please? Thank you, Dr. Fox. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Owens, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for our witnesses for joining us. Ensuring all children have opportunities to achieve the American dream must never be a partisan issue. All students, regardless of zip code or socioeconomic status, should have the freedom to attend the school that meets their unique needs, setting them up for lifelong success. I grew up in the Deep South in the time of Jim Crow and the KKK. Racial segregation and inequities in education are not just the chapters in the history book for me. I lived and experienced them firsthand. I'm the child of educators. My father received his PhD from Ohio State University and taught agronomy at Florida A&M. My mother was a junior high school teacher. I was taught from a young age that the importance of education and hard work. I firmly believe education is the key to unlocking our children's future of possibilities. Tragically, the COVID-19 pandemic has served as a major setback for K-12 students nationwide. The purpose of today's hearing might be to discuss educational equity post-COVID-19, but there can be no educational equity when classrooms doors remain shut. Too many poor families, many of them students of color, as well as those with disabilities, have been left with no educational options other than to wait on the bureaucrats to, quote, follow the science and reopen schools. The Biden administration